On this episode of the Black Boss Ladies platform,
and was getting my second star. And this is a quick story about that. I was sitting there I was getting ready to have my promotion ceremony that day, and the public affairs officer, communications officer came in. She says, Channel 5 in Louisville wants to talk to you. I said, why? And then she looked at me, she said, you don't know, do you? I said, no, what? She said, you're the first African-American female in the history of the Army to get a second star. And I went, wow. My job when they promoted me was they made me the deputy chief for the entire Army Reserve. And so at that time we had about 200,000 soldiers, about, I'd say 30,000 civilians, and we had an $8 billion budget.
And just hearing your story, like, where did that come from though? That drive, where did that stem from?
That came from the women in my life. My great-grandmother, Carrie Wiley, my grandmother, Arlene Brown, and my mother, Arlene Mahan. None of them went to college.
Welcome to the Black Boss Ladies platform, the place where legacies live.
Welcome to the Black Boss Ladies platform podcast. I'm Tiffany Lee.
And I'm Julia Myers.
And today we have with us Major General Marcia Anderson. Okay, we felt like it was important that we bring on someone who had military experience. We haven't had anyone of that nature before. And who better to bring on than the first African-American female Major General. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Ms. Anderson.
Thank you very much.
So we always like to start off our shows with asking our guests, what does success mean to you?
Success for me, since I have three grandsons, is for them to be able to look back and see what I did with my life and have that as an inspiration for them. Not that they need to do what I did, and not that they need to, achieve at some super high level, but whatever they do in life, it has to be something that they're passionate about, and that they apply themselves, that you apply yourself to it so that you're successful. So it's whether you are managing, a fast food restaurant, or you are an entrepreneur and you are, in the Fortune 500, that you lived with passion and you left a legacy.
See, I love that. And the reason why I love that so much is a few things that you said. Not that they have to do what I did. Yeah. That's first, because I think that so many times from the parents' perspective, they want the child to do what they did. And then I think, it was a book by Ralph Emerson, I believe, that where he said too many children pick up the tools of their fathers. Right. So
because they never get out to discover, like, is this really what I wanted? Right. Yeah. I've met people going through life and they became lawyers because my dad was a lawyer, my granddad was a lawyer, right? And now I got to be a lawyer, and they had to be a lawyer. You know what I'm saying?
There's no passion.
There was no passion there. It was what I had to do. So they never went on a discovery for what life could bring them. So that definition is amazing. If this is what your mind decided, you got in alignment with it, and you brought it to pass, then I've done my job.
Yep. Yeah. And the passion part. That's what people don't realize. It's like sometimes we feel like my husband and I have sat back and thought about, we worked at McDonald's when we were, I was a senior in high school. We worked at McDonald's, and sometimes we think like, what if we had stayed at McDonald's? You could have been an owner by now. You know what I'm saying? Or you could have been a regional manager. It's like, a lot of times people want jobs because of how it looks.
And it's really big now with social media. People are following a look more than anything.
They are, and I don't understand that at all. Yes, if a lot of people may know you or know you, they don't really know you.
Right.
Your name,
they know what you present to the
your
world.
name is out there. What are you going to do next? What are you adding? What value are you adding?
What value do you add to the human race? I love that. Yeah. So military though, did you wake up one day when you were born, high school, and say, hey, I'm going to the military? How did you get to that conclusion?
Well, I did think that my brother's G.I. Joe was much more interesting than my Barbie. Because G.I. Joe had a tank.
Right.
And it moved. And Barbie was just like hanging out with Ken. I was like, So no, I did not. But I did tend to play with boys because they played, they did stuff. But what really happened was I was in college and I went to a liberal arts college, Creighton University, which is in Omaha, Nebraska. And at that time, everybody, this is in the 70s, I'm old, you had to have some science credit. And I was working my way through school. I really wanted to take astronomy. That would have worked fine, but I wasn't taking, I couldn't take biology for dummies during the day because I just didn't want to do that. So I wanted astronomy. So I was like, what am I going to do? So I'm standing at registration. This is way before computers, everybody. You stood in line in a hot, ugly gym and you tried to get into a class.
Yeah. They had the books.
They had somebody sitting at a table.
They still had that when I was.
They had the books when I got there. You had to stand in line. So it's not that, I think this generation, but you had to stand and wait for to talk. They had offices there.
Yeah, and there was one table that had no one in line. And it had these initials, ROTC. Not know what that was. But below it said military science. And I said, so I walk over, and there's this, and I now know he was a sergeant. At the time I did not know he was wearing a uniform. And I said, what's this about? And they had posters of people jumping out of airplanes and rappelling. And as I said, walking through the woods, hiking, this is what they were doing. But they were great posters. Right. I said, so this looks like physical education class. He said, well, it's kind of like that. Well, I said, well, when does it meet? 8 a.m. Monday through Thursday. Okay, I'm a morning person. In college, I know that was odd. And then he says, they'll give you a stipend. Well, that wasn't in my vocabulary. I didn't even know what a stipend was. In St. Louis, Illinois, I was like, what's a stipend? And he said, well, they'll pay you to go to class. I said, where do I sign? Right. So exactly. I signed up at that moment to Reserve Officer Training Corps, ROTC, and that's where my journey started. But so I didn't play on any organized. I played on some organized sports teams when I was younger, but not during high school. So I wasn't varsity or even junior or any of that. I didn't have any teams, but I liked the idea that I was part of a team. Okay. I love the military history aspect because I love history. I liked the people that I was with because they came from different disciplines in the university, so I wasn't just hanging out with
the same. Everybody majoring in the same thing.
Yeah. And our central focus was learning these new skills about leadership, working as part of a team, and being part of something that was greater than yourself.
Would you say that you already came to that space though, because you with a level of discipline? Because you said I was in college and I like to wake up at 8 a.m. Like that's a little different, right?
Well, I think maybe that just was, when I was going to high school, I had to get up pretty early because I lived in East St. Louis, and I went to a Catholic girls' high school that was in Midtown St. Louis, Rosada King. Okay. And so I'd take like 3 buses to get to, city buses to get to school. From East St. Louis, cross the river, and so I was up early all the time. So it was a habit to get up early, and I was really driven when I was in college because I earned a lot of advanced placement credits. I actually got to college as a sophomore. I had enough credits.
Wow. And this is back when, because I know it's kind of big now where you see the young kids graduating with associates too, but this is back in the 70s.
Yeah, I cut a deal with my principal because I researched it. I said I have enough credits to graduate. I don't want to stay for another semester, so I left high school in December before I graduated in '76. But the deal I cut with her was I went to Southern Illinois University, the Edwardsville campus, and I earned some more credits. Okay. So when I got to college, I was a sophomore basically.
Oh wow, great!
I don't want to move past this quick though, because I'm thinking about where I was when I was a high school student, and just hearing your story. Like, where did that come from though? That drive. Where did that stem from?
That came from the women in my life. My great-grandmother, Carrie Wiley, my grandmother, Arlene Brown, and my mother, Arlene Mahan. None of them went to college. Carrie, my great-grandmother, I don't think she got past 6th grade. My grandmother wanted to be a nurse, but there was no money. So education was very, very important to them. I grew up in a house where every Saturday, this is going to sound geeky too, we got to go to the library and I could take out 4 books. And I would read those 4 books and I was ready for the next Saturday to get some more books. So there were magazines, Ebony, Jet, I mean, you name it in the house, Time Magazine, Newsweek. reading and learning and education were paramount.
Let me say something. I think that is important that, people learn, because you went to the library, you said, and I got to check out 4 books. And I think that some people find the library intimidating. And the library itself, though, has made itself more accessible. If you go to the library now, they have podcasting studios. They have places where you can do like live action movies, like green rooms, and they have video games and everything. So just for our listeners, if you have young children, please take them to the library. They do library tours. They'll teach them everything that they need to know about how to use those tools, because I think it's important as well. Yeah. I read a lot as a kid. I think reading helps you.
I was going to say, I feel like that's where those seeds are planted, because I always kind of analyze my life like, well, how did I get here versus, someone else that had the same upbringing. And every time I talk to a Black boss lady, it always goes back to reading, though, in some kind of capacity in a very, very early age. So I think that's awesome. And I worked at the library all through college.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, they gave me my assistantship for grad school.
Okay. Yeah. And I want to say something too, when you talked about your mother and your grandmother. And I think that's important to know too, because like you said, your grandmother didn't get past the 6th grade. Great-grandmother didn't get past the 6th grade, okay? And your mother couldn't go to college.
My grandmother couldn't go to college.
I think that's important too, because I think sometimes people give up. It's like, well, I didn't make it, and so that's the end of the line. But this is why you have a legacy. This is why you have children. You didn't make it, but you can make a way for them to make it.
Yeah.
And do what you can with the resources around you. So, hey, we're going to the library on Saturday.
Exactly. It was a treat. It wasn't a punishment. And then one more person I better mention is my uncle, Father Joseph Brown, who's a Jesuit and a scholar, Black scholar. And he was an example, too.
At SIU? Father Brown?
Yes. No.
Wow. I went to Carbondale. Yes. So everybody knows Father Brown. I never had his class, but we all know him. Yes.
So he was an example. He was an example, too.
They honor him a lot at SIU.
Yeah, they should. They should. He's worked hard, and there's lots of graduates who are out in the world doing great things because of his mentoring and encouragement and support.
When I went to his Jubilee, a lot of the students who had studied under him talked about how they got their PhD because Father Brown said we need to.
That's what he was very vocal as I did.
He still is.
He's still there. He's still there.
They got them.
That's the next break. He's never
not going anywhere.
That's amazing. Yes. All right, so you see this. You're signing up for ROTC. They got a stipend. You love the people. Tell us about your experience there.
It was, I had to take a lot of responsibility early on. They give everybody kind of an assignment, so they put you in charge of something. And then you're accountable. They hold you accountable for that. And that was a very good experience for me because I had not done things like that in my life. So I had to sometimes lead people, 2 or 3 people. I mean, not 30 people. But they just started to train you to be an officer, which is what, you're supposed to do if you're an officer in any branch of the military. So I was in the Army. It was a good experience. I got to do physical things as well. I had to learn new things like first aid and how to use a compass in the woods, which I never was very good at. Still am not. Thank goodness for GPS. But they just taught me, I exposed me to different things. I'd never fired a weapon before. Now I'm not a gun person, but I had to learn that skill. And like anything else that they taught me, I listened to everything they told me. And a quick story, when they took me to the firing range the first time, and the guy gave me little instructions on how to do all this, I almost fired expert. He said, "Are you sure you've never fired a weapon?" And I said, "Well, I did everything you told me." they tell you about breathing and trigger squeeze and all that. Don't anticipate the anything. And I said, I just followed your instructions. And he just looked at me like, okay. But that's who I was.
He's like, I get these instructions all the time.
And no one serves up as an expert.
They don't listen. They don't.
But that is actually a very basic skill of life. Like a lot of people want to do things. I used to teach this course called Mastering Your Vision Board. And one of the first things I tell people is, who do you listen to? You listen to people who have what you want. But a lot of people have a hard time listening and taking in instructions. They want to do it for themselves before they even know what they're supposed to be doing.
Right.
So you could become an expert quickly if you leverage other people's knowledge.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. You really listen to what they're saying. Yeah.
So you're ROTC. What are you majoring in?
Well, I was majoring in political science. I wanted to be a lawyer. I did want to be a lawyer, not because I knew anybody personally. The person who was kind of my role model for this was a woman who was a legislator in Illinois. Her name was Wybetta Young.
Wybetta Young.
Yeah,
There's so many lives.
Yes.
They just renamed the campus in East St. Louis.
As they should have. And I was so inspired by her. I mean, she's a legislator. I think she had 5 kids. I think one of her kids was special needs. And I said, lawyers can do anything. So that was when I decided to be a lawyer. But yeah, so I was majoring in political science. I started out in business, but I really don't have the head for business. It was too constraining. But I liked history, and political science has a lot of history in it, the riots and things like that. So I loved history. So that's what I was majoring in. And I was, as I said, I was working part-time, off the books at a bar, on the books at a hospital, doing, so yeah.
All of this at undergrad.
And at one point, my advisor there, I know she said to me, she's going to take 15 credits. She said, you don't have to take 15 credits. I said, I need to get done. And that was my goal, was to get done. Because I knew my family and me, we could not afford this. So I was trying not to run up a huge student loan debt. That was also backup. That was also part of my strategy, was keep the student loans to a minimum.
Yes. Yeah. And we need to make sure that we do that now, because this student loan is a trap.
It really is. I'm blessed I remember just not long ago, I worked in government and they paid off $127,000. But it was the only bill. Yes. Wow. And when I tell you that's life changing, I didn't even realize God is so great. Like, he puts you on a path that you don't even know is happening. But because I didn't have money, I took out a lot of debt in college, in grad school, Then I went back for a second master's that I didn't finish. But working in government allowed me to get that off. But I remember looking at that number and paying so much money a month and then not moving, right? And this is decisions I made when I was 19, 20, right? And so it can be very paralyzing.
Yeah, it can be. And I used to live in a family where everybody was kind of risk averse in terms of loans and debt.
Right.
And my grandmother, I grew up in the house. We all lived in the same house. My mother, my grandmother, my aunt, and my brother and I. And you just didn't take on debt unless you absolutely had to. So that's why I worked 2 jobs to get through college. Wow. I had friends who took out their student loans at registration. Oh, they're going to give me $3,000. I'm going to get a car. And I'm like, why would you do that? I know I got this clunker I bought, but so people were using the money for rent and other things. And I said, I don't think that's a good idea. So I'm glad I took that course. I did it without a lot of things. I mean, there were, events I couldn't go to. But it's like a lot of sacrifice.
So you get through undergrad and you head off to law school in New York.
Masters.
Before I went to law school, I decided I wanted to work for a couple of years. So I actually worked for the Kellogg Company. They had a manufacturing plant in Omaha. And I learned how to make cereal. And I don't eat cereal anymore.
Oh, wow.
I don't want to tell you. I'm not going to tell you, but there's a lot of things in cereal besides corn and rice.
And corn probably ain't that. So it's funny. It's on History Channel. They actually have the Kellogg story. Him and his brother.
I saw that.
Right. And if you see, it seems wonky now. Like, he really was looking at cereal to heal people,
to heal
right?
people.
And then him and his brother went through lawsuit and he lost everything. Yeah, they broke up. So I was like, this is you do look at cereal different though.
Yeah, and it's because it's got a lot of additives and stuff.
Yeah. Mostly sugar now.
It's mostly sugar now. So I did that, but I did that intentionally because I wanted to have a break from school. I've been working so hard, but also I thought I needed to experience a little bit of life before I went to law school.
I think that's important as well.
So I had to work in an environment which really prepared me for a lot of the rest of my life because it was a very blue collar, white dominated manufacturing plant, and I was one of the only two or three of us who were supervisors. But I got into the supervisor program. I started out in the warehouse, basically counting boxes at midnight, doing the inventory. And there were some white males there who did not want me as their supervisor when I got into the program. And so, and I had to go toe to toe with some of them, and I did face to face and toe to toe. They're cussing, I'm cussing. I'm like, dude, I'm from East St. Louis. Are you think you're going to intimidate me? What's wrong with you?
Yeah, because they don't want a woman, let alone a black woman, telling them what to do.
Right.
Because this is the 80s, right?
This was like, I graduated from college in 79, so this was early 80s. And it still was, the world was still changing. So that was a good experience for me. But I had already planned to go to law school, and I knew I had gotten actually accepted to Creighton law school, but then I made a decision, as I said, to take some time off, and I knew I'd have to reapply to other schools, but that was fine. I said, I know I can get in somewhere, so I'm not worried about that. Yeah. And that's how I
working with that population help you in the military because it's often the very same population.
It's sometimes the same type of mindset and also their lived experience.
The same groups.
The same, yeah. So they're not used to. Certainly not at that plant. They were not used to, they weren't living in integrated neighborhoods. They didn't grow up in integrated environments. So I had to learn how to go reach them where they were. As I said, get down to that level and then let them know I wasn't going to take any smack from them. I knew that, and it was a union environment, so I knew how far up to the line they could go. And if they cross it, we're going to talk to your union steward right now after the shift ends.
Why do you think? Because I'm thinking about, you say you took this job in a place where we're very male dominant in the early 80s. Why do you think they chose you? How do you think you were able to get them to see you do? Okay.
I know. When I went through the job interview and I told them I had gone through ROTC, and there were a lot of men in that room interviewing me who had either been in Vietnam or in Korea. And so we basically, at one point, I realized the interview was just about military stuff, basic training, and and I thought to myself, you're going to get hired?
Right.
And then it occurred to me, yes, I am going to get hired.
Because they knew you had to
train you on a different level. They connected with you.
There was different mindsets here because while the racist thing is happening and it's real, but I think at a certain level when you start to go up, people start looking at mindsets, right? And they know you had the mindset that was going to be able to handle what you were going into.
Right. And I understood, the chain of command. I understood all of those kinds of basic concepts. They wouldn't have to teach them to me.
Right.
But I also knew how to stand up for myself, which happened when I got it had one of my first interviews after I got to be in the supervisory training program, and the plant manager who's over everybody, he did me my performance evaluation, and he talks about metrics, and he says, and everyone thinks you have a wonderful smile, and I said, did you put that in Bill's evaluation? And he was so taken aback. Right. I said, I don't think that's part of a performance evaluation.
Right.
Okay.
I don't even think I would have known to say something like that.
Well, it's just I kind of blurted it out without thinking about the consequences of that particular statement to that person. But I just let them know, no, that's not I'm glad they like my smile, but that shouldn't be in my performance evaluation.
Exactly.
Which is true. So how long did you stay at Kellogg?
Just about 3 years. Okay. So it would be 2.5 years because I graduated in 79 and I entered Rutgers Law School in Newark in 81.
Okay. Yeah. So did you get your master's before or after?
My master's in strategic studies I got through the military at the U.S. Army War College.
Right.
So that was many, many years later. I got that in 2003.
Okay. All right. I assumed you got your master's first. Okay. So wonderful. Rutgers Law School. At that time, Rutgers was not very integrated, was it?
Oh, yes.
It was.
After the riots the uprisings, as my classmates call them.
Right now,
Uprising.
that's what we
Yeah,
we learned.
we learned
now that we
There's
have
an uprising.
changed the language, like we
Language
spoke
is
about
everything.
before in another interview. Not riots, because that has a negative connotation, but she's talking about the uprisings that happened, like Detroit and
Yes.
Watts and
68.
so forth in the 60s. Yeah,
in the
so
60s. So one of the professors that I took at the law school, coincidentally, grew up in Newark, and he was part of all that. And one of the demands they made of the law school was, you are right in the middle of this community. You are not part of this community. You are at Ivory Tower. And they basically said, this has got to stop. So they started a minority student program, and we just celebrated a couple of years of 40th to 50th anniversary of that program. That was one of the first off, they call it affirmative action, but they basically realized that they needed to have a diverse student body.
Right.
And so it survived challenges. It survived legal challenges, and it still exists. So the Rutgers Newark Law School, which is also Camden campus, which is newer than the Newark campus, which is the original one, was very diverse.
Okay.
I had a very diverse group of classmates.
And I think that that's important because, one thing that you said is not really an affirmative action program. People look negatively at affirmative action programs and so forth, but diversity actually helps you to learn. It helps any organization to be successful because you're serving a diverse population.
Yes.
Right. So we all
diverse population, people come with their wisdom, their culture. You get to be able to see again the world through different eyes. So that means you can go out into the world and serve it in different capacities.
Absolutely. And I know there's studies that have been done that have shown that, organizations, companies, you name it, that are diverse do better than others because you're not going to succumb. You're not going to succumb to groupthink.
Exactly.
And innovation that's what comes. That's where innovation comes from. Is different perspectives, life and lived experiences.
So, how was your time in New York? How was it? Well, you're in.
Well, I love the New York area. I mean, I'm from and that's really why I applied when we went on. We were all, getting to know each other in law school, and everybody's like, well, I applied to Rutgers Newark because you have a great clinical program. And people are saying, and this professor, he's renowned for torts. And I'm sitting there going, what is it? What I said, I wanted to see the ocean.
Oh,
Because in my mind, so in my mind, it's like you're from East St. Louis, right? And East St. Louis is a small town, right?
Yeah.
And you're out here in New York, which is different. So while you're in law school and stuff, the person you're forming and becoming in a different space, like that's a journey in itself.
It was. And I love the New York, just culturally and just the excitement of New York City. And I would just go explore, and I loved riding the subway. And I would just talk to people because I was from the Midwest. They would be kind of startled sometimes.
Yeah, when you start talking.
You don't talk to people in elevators, but I did. How are you today?
Well, yeah. When I first moved to Chicago, think about it, it's Midwest, but it's not East St. Louis. They's like, stop speaking to people.
Yeah,
you gonna walk past somebody and not speak to them? Like,
how can you do that?
You can't, that's like crazy where we're from. Like, you don't do that.
But I love the city, and just I got to go to shows. I would save my little money, and I was still on the budget. But I got to go to different things, and I love my classmates. So many of them were from the East Coast, and so we would have these interesting discussions. They nicknamed me Dorothy, which they thought was funny because I was from the Midwest. Wizard of Oz, Kansas. Yeah.
And you lived on Kansas, so
I did live on Kansas City, St. Louis. Yeah.
Well, that's it. Tell us a little bit about. We always hear about how law school is just so hard. Just tell us a little bit. I know that maybe that was your experience, maybe not. What law school? What would you say?
I would say law school was the first time I ever actually had to really study.
Okay.
I could read stuff in college and then I could do anything. But law school, you basically are learning a different language in a sense. You are, even though you may know how to write a composition, legal arguments are formed a little bit differently.
Right.
And so at one point, I got so frustrated one time. I called my mother and she says, how's it going? And I was like, whining and crying, blah, blah, blah. And I said, I don't understand any of this stuff. And I'm reading it over and over again. She says, well, you never had trouble reading it before. And I was like, no, this is not the right.
It's not the same.
No, it's not the same. And so, and when you start out, they start you out with, a property class, which goes back to the, England. And then that's where they start you.
Yeah,
You
that's
start
when
learning
you
about
start.
the concept of owning property. And
I was
owning
just going to
things.
say, about in real estate, like the language is different because it all originated back then. You
Yeah.
only get a little bit of taste
Mhm.
in real estate school, but
Yeah.
it goes back there.
Yeah, so it was, so those were a lot of adjustments I had to make. There was a lot of reading to do and a lot of concepts to absorb. And of course, the classroom work, they would call on you, you needed to know. And I had the same teacher that I mentioned that grew up in Newark, was a Black professor. He was hard on the Black students.
Oh, really?
But he was hard on everybody. But when you went to his class, he taught property. He taught the real property class. You needed to know the cases that were in the footnotes.
Oh.
He would call on you and he would ask you a question about something that was in the footnote. And so just don't.
You ain't even really paying attention to that.
Well,
At first.
at first, but then you got wise and then you bought the cases from the previous class because they would sell them to you. They
Right.
made copies. But yeah, law school it was intellectually challenging. It was hard, but it has helped me in other parts of my life. It helps me organize my thoughts. It made me a better writer.
Okay.
I wrote pretty well already, but as I said, it helped me organize my thoughts a lot better and to make arguments. So yeah, I don't recommend everybody go to law school for those reasons.
Yeah.
But if you're thinking about it, just be aware it's a lot of reading. It's a lot of reading. It's a lot of critical thinking. You're not just supposed to memorize cases and spout them back. You need to be able to apply those to current facts and situations and conditions, and fashion an argument that incorporates those.
Right.
So a winning argument.
Because they always refer to a precedent that was set in the
Mhm.
previous cases and so forth. Now, that's one more thing about law school. I wonder about this because a lot of people say, like you just said, we bought cases from previous classes, but also a lot of people talk about group study
Yes.
in law school.
Mhm.
And did your team work in ROTC come into play there in that group work?
A little bit in terms of respecting other people's opinions and really, as I said, listening to people instead of thinking about what you're going to say next. And so I had a study group that I work with one of my best friends in the world, Yvonne Smith-Seegers. I'm going to make her watch this and she'll know I said her name. But, we were Black students and there was an Asian student, Bill Ng, who was in our group. So what you didn't pick up in class, another person will have picked up in class in terms of understanding and explaining a concept. So that's the strength and the power of study groups. So some people try to go it alone, and some people probably just can do it. But I needed to hear from my colleagues what they thought they had heard.
Because everybody can sit in the room but pick up different parts of the language, like what's being taught. Like, oh, I saw this. Oh, I saw this. So then you guys put it together.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. So, because I went through your bio, while you're in law school, are you still with the military?
Yes. So
Okay,
I was in the Army Reserve. The Army Reserve and the National Guard, we're part-time.
Yeah.
So you can balance your military career with your civilian and your, civilian life.
Okay.
The Army Reserve and National Guard, you typically go somewhere and meet one weekend a month. And then you have usually a 2-week period of continuous full-time duty. So I was able to balance that while I was with law school. At one point, though, in law school, I decided to put it on kind of a pause.
Okay.
So you can kind of go into a category where I still had an obligation. I had an 8-year obligation initially, and and after that I just stayed. But so you can put it on pause, and there's no, it's not a black mark on you. You simply just put on pause, and you come back and you continue your service. And even in that pause, they could call me up to do certain things, which was fine with me because they paid me. They paid me.
Right.
So yeah.
I was in the military, and we had to be in reserves. So I was 2 years active, and then it was 6 years inactive. But at any time in that 6 years, if something happened, they could call you and say you're reactivated. But I didn't know about the pause.
Well, I call it. It's inactive. It's inactive. I'm saying pause for the people who are listening and don't know.
Okay, I got you.
But the inactive reserve is what they call it.
Okay.
So that's where I was for a couple of years, and then I once I graduated from law school and started working for a law firm, I went back to being active.
That's what I was going to say. So after law school, you go out into the world. Do you stay in New York after that, or?
Yeah. I was in the New York, New Jersey area. I worked
Okay.
for a defense firm. They did insurance litigation. I worked for them for a couple of years. And then I decided that I did not like that part of the law. And I felt that my strength was someplace else, and it was really in court administration. And so I went to work for the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, which is one of the 11 appeals courts that take appeals from different states in the country. So I went to work there as an administrator, helping manage cases, working with the judges. And so that's what I did for the rest of my career. And
That's with that's with the state, or that's with the
federal.
That's federal.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. So the United States. So you got your district courts, which are your trial courts, and you got your courts of appeal, and then you got your U.S. Supreme Court. So that's
wow, that's pretty high up, because you're taking, like, when we are seeing some of these abortion restrictions that are coming out of the states, many of those are going up for appeal on the federal level and everything.
right.
And so their big decisions are being made on that level.
Mm-hmm.
How was your time there? I'm imagining, and I may be, were you one of the only Black faces in those rooms, or very few? What does the makeup look like in this?
At that time in the 80s, mid to late 80s, I was one of the few people who was working in the managerial level. There were a lot of people working at the entry level, the clerks, the people who moved the paper, processed everything, but I was supervising them. So yes, I was one of the few people that was in that space. But my colleagues, by then people started to get a little bit more, there were more people who were my age who were like, as long as you can do the job, I don't care what you look like.
Right.
I mean, yes, there were some people at the senior level who were still kind of, I don't know about this. But I would just demonstrate that I belonged. I would do the job. I would sometimes, and I would often make sure I did better than anybody else had done. And I mentioned innovation earlier. I would bring things to the person I was working for, who was a white female, who was pretty old school. And I say, we should try to do this because of this, this, and this. But I wouldn't go in there and just say, we should do this. I would have a rationale for it. I could demonstrate, why this was going to be better in terms of whatever results she wanted to achieve. And usually I would appeal to her wanting to impress the judges.
Okay.
So that, and that's
you
for
were looking
anything.
at that whenever you're doing something, you got to look at that's your target market. What do they care about?
Right.
What do they care about?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
managing them without
You're managing. You start to manage other people.
Managing up.
Managing up. Before I even knew that term was managing up. Yeah.
Was there any cases at that time that stood out to you that you guys were working on?
Well, I didn't personally work on the cases. We managed them and moved them through the court system. But at that time, Agent Orange was still going through the trial court, and it was coming up and going back, because they appeal pieces of a case. Then it goes back down, then it comes back up.
Right.
So Agent Orange was a big issue then. At one point while I was there, I moved from the clerk's office, which is the place that administers the cases, to the staff attorney's office. They're kind of extra law clerks, or they're attorneys who write memos about the cases for the judges. So they're not actually in chambers with the judges, they're an additional office. And so I became a supervisor in that office. Okay. At that time, we had issues where at the time they didn't want to have LGBTQ people march in the St. Patrick's Day parade. So there was always somebody trying to get an injunction for that, to prevent that from happening, or to be allowed to march in the parade, or the New York City transit strikes. They had a strike every year while I was there. Felt that way. I mean, so those cases would come along, and so those were important cases because if they went on strike, the whole city would shut down.
Yeah,
and then it was important to have people allowed to march in parades,
right?
Whether you liked it or not, they had a right to be in that parade. If they were Irish or if they were a veteran, they should not be barred from marching in those parades.
Right.
So those were some interesting cases.
Yeah, I would say this too, because when you talk about they go up and they go down, and that's one of the things that I think is important about the work that you were doing there in that office, that appeals office, because a lot of times we think, that all of these cases will go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court only takes a select few cases. So many times this appeals court, federal appeals court, that's the final line.
It's the final word.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court typically takes cases when there's different courts of appeal that have come out in different places. So that's kind of why they'll take certain cases.
Okay, thank you for that. I didn't know that part. Look,
I'm learning a lot.
There's when they call it, there's a conflict amongst the circuits, and so it needs to be resolved.
Okay.
Oh. So during this time, you're still moving up in the military. That's because like there's a lot. There's
a lot going on. I mean, because it wasn't just going. As I said, it was 2 weekends a month, 2 weeks a year. That's great when you're entry level, but when you start to get into the mid-range in your military career, you get more responsibility and you're doing things in between. You're going to meetings on different weekends. So sometimes I would have, 2 or 3 weekends a month where I was doing military stuff. I didn't have my own weekend. And you also have a military professional education requirement. In order to get promoted to the next level at certain ranks, you have to have completed certain military education. And in order to be a general, you have to have a master's degree.
Okay, so that's
my law degree, and I had to get a master's degree from their college. So there were a lot of different requirements that came along.
So you're literally doing 2 dual careers at the same time, and you're excelling in both. Because over here you're managing the field corps, and then you're managing 6,000 soldiers in this space.
Yeah.
How? Like what?
I think I was just driven out, and I think I should have been more mindful of the impact it could have on me health-wise. I mean, I didn't, I'll talk about that in a little bit, but because I truly believe that stress has a role to play in different illnesses and like cancer and things like that. I really believe it. I don't have any data for that. But I was so driven to excel in both. And I was mindful of the fact that I was a senior level person of color, a Black woman in the federal court system.
Yes.
And so I got onto different committees. Because I wasn't really thinking about this intentionally. I just was interested, but I also thought, well, you could have a diverse people on it. So I would tell somebody, you need to recommend me for that committee. And they would. And then I could be in that space, but people got to see me, they got to know me, and then that led to other things. And then the same thing in the military. I would ask for the difficult jobs. Sometimes they gave them to me because they wanted me to fail. But then when I didn't, they'd be like, Because I also made sure I asked questions. I was a good listener, but I also made sure to ask questions because certainly in the legal area, you want to get it right. But in the military, if you are training people and you haven't asked the right questions, some of them get hurt. Even in training, we have people who get injured and sometimes killed. And so, as you well know, so I was always asking the sergeants questions.
I never thought about that. Like training, because you're supposed to train them as if you're in the space, right?
Yes.
But that does have a backlash of, and so much to die.
It's got to
die in real life.
Yeah, it's got to be realistic. And so I made sure that the sergeants knew I cared about them. It was authentic. They knew I meant it. I wasn't just saying it because sometimes they'll say, "Oh, I love myself." Some of them were just trying to get to their next job.
Right.
And I always made sure I focused on the current job I was doing. I wasn't thinking about the next job. In my mind, and that was probably naive on my part, it was going to happen if I did the right things, if I took care of people, if I produced good results.
But it did.
I don't think that's naive.
No, because your resume says it.
I think that that's important, right?
Yeah.
Because and I've said this before. I think, I've said, sometimes you have to fully fill up a space before you go to the next space, and I think that a lot of times you're right. We don't sit in the now.
No,
we don't sit in the now. We always are looking here, forward and sometimes backwards. And so it's important to be in those positions and actually do a great job. And you said, well, that was naive. Well, it helped you.
But what I meant by being naive though was I sometimes would hadn't done enough thought about my assignments that I might want to take. I was just taking whatever came along, but there were people who obviously were watching me,
and
they were watching me, and they were kind of guiding me without.
We
me
want her to,
knowing.
because they were seeing your value.
Yeah.
They were giving you difficult jobs, so they knew let's move her this way.
Exactly.
Their purpose.
That is exactly
So
what
instead of her laying out her chess moves, they were kind of laying them out for you.
Because they recognize again, that this was a serious business. The military is a serious business, and they didn't want Joe in there just because Joe's dad had been a
just
general.
people's lives are
Right.
It was important. So there were people who recognized that, and then I slowly began to realize what was going on. But I still thought it was important, not to phone it in. I wasn't going to phone it in. I was going to let the soldiers and then the civilians who work for me know that I really cared about them personally.
Let me ask you this, because a lot of ladies that are women are watching our show, like you're carrying 2 careers and you're excelling in them. What does your personal life look like? Are you dating? Do you have children? Like, how is that working? Because we are multi-dimensional. Right?
Yes.
So because we ain't got time to go on a date or change a pamper.
I will admit, although I get grandkids, this is a second marriage, and that's how I kind of inherited the kids. And now I have the grandkids.
Oh, okay.
So I never had any children of my own, which is, I kind of wish I had. But, still dating could be complicated.
No, I can't. I got to run the world.
I can't be here. It was just important I wouldn't say choosy, but I was kind of choosy.
Right.
And sometimes it was just, people just were, I love men, I love our men, but sometimes if I told them I was a lawyer, something else would happen in their heads.
Yep.
And no. So actually, at one point, my girlfriend and I said, we're just going to tell them we're paralegals. So this is another day.
It's funny, but I started rewatching Sex in the City, and Miranda was having issues because she was excelling, and this is a white woman. She's excelling as a lawyer, and every time she goes on a date, she said, "I'm a lawyer." Something happens, so she started telling them that she was a flight attendant.
There you go.
So it's funny to hear that.
Yeah,
it's true.
I think it's interesting in some ways, though, because I don't know if there was a change at some point in time, because I've been talking about within the last 10, 15 years that it seems like in some ways a lot of black men are marrying up, or what we consider to be up, right? So they're not really marrying women necessarily, as in their professional careers and stuff, that are on what would be considered the same level.
Mm-hmm.
They're marrying someone who may have a better job, make more money. So I wonder what happened there between
I think
when
we began
you guys were. You guys were, having this backlash to where it's like the men say, you know what, hey,
I think they just have to accept it. I think it came to a thing where you have no choice but to accept it.
Yeah.
If you want something great, you want to leave a legacy, you want to build something. It's like, hey, well, she doing it, so we got to do it together.
And a personal connection, I think. So so that was the early days. As I said, I've been married twice. The first one didn't work out. So, because we just kind of grew apart and probably were not incompatible in the first place. But yeah, so I kind of worked through that. And, the thing that happened is I got more senior, and my husband Amos will tell you this, I had to be more intentional about scheduling and not just scheduling 2 weeks out, scheduling 2 months out.
Yep.
And doing my best. I'm still not good at this, keeping him informed about what's coming up. So you have to really become a good manager, and that's when I first got up what they call those file facts, one of those things. Before we had phone organizers, they had paper organizers. So that's when I started using those. Yeah, so I started using paper organizers to keep track of everything. Yeah.
Like the planners or something.
Yeah, the planner.
Okay.
Yeah,
So you had to be intentional about
planner.
About that space.
Yeah, to be intentional about all of that. And
I remember one of my friends, she's pretty advanced or climbing the corporate ladder. She's done really well for herself. And she started dating. She's like, how am I supposed to have time to go on these dates and still work? Because she's working till the night. Like, you do have to be intentional. So you get to weed out the noise a lot when you're there because you just don't have time.
No, you don't.
Yeah. Just wanted to know.
Yeah. I want to make sure we get to your career at the Pentagon.
Okay, so how I got there, as I mentioned, to be a general, you have to have a master's degree. So I attended and graduated from the Army War College. And then I got promoted to Brigadier General. And I wasn't the first African American woman, but I was like the second in the Army Reserve to get to Brigadier General. So, and I still wasn't thinking about a second star. I was just trying to do a good job. I was assigned for a year at Fort Knox in charge, and that's where the Army's Human Resources function is headquartered for all of the Army, not just current people who are currently on duty. People who are retired are supported through there. We support families when there's a person's killed or things like that. So they cover everything. And so I was the deputy there. I was the second most senior person there. And that's when I found out I'd gotten promoted and was getting my second star. And this is a quick story about that. I was sitting there I was getting ready to have my promotion ceremony that day, and the public affairs communications officer came in. She says, Channel 5 in Louisville wants to talk to you. I said, why? And then she looked at me, she said, you don't know, do you? I said, no, what? She said, you're the first African-American female in the history of the Army to get a second star. And I went, wow. So I said, give me like 5 minutes. I had to rewrite my speech.
Can you tell our audience, what the star stands for?
So when you go, like any organization, there's different levels of I'll say rank. We call it rank in the military. So you start out as a second lieutenant, become a first lieutenant, become a captain, become a major, a lieutenant colonel. Then you're a colonel. Then you're a brigadier general. Then you're a major general. Then there's 2 levels above that. Lieutenant general was a 3-star, and then general is a 4-star. So Secretary Austin was a general. He was a 4-star in the Army. Okay. So it took me about almost 30 years to get to that point, because you move up, in increments. So reaching that level was really significant. That level, a 2-star general in the Army, and in other services, you can be in charge of over 10,000 soldiers at any one time, or you can be in charge of a major function. My job when they promoted me was they made me the deputy chief for the entire Army Reserve. And so at that time we had about 200,000 soldiers, about I'd say 30,000 civilians, and we had an $8 billion budget.
That's a lot of people and a lot of money.
Congratulations.
And this is where oh my God.
So the Pentagon was an interesting place. I mean, there's a lot that happens there. A lot of our work isn't just in the building itself. We have to interact with, the appropriations folks on Capitol Hill. I didn't do any testimony, but there's a lot of things going on there because you're running a global enterprise.
Yes.
And there's people in the building who have agendas. And the military people like myself may be there for 3 years, but the civilian full-time workforce, they're going to be there forever.
They're like the people at the White House. You guys you're just here for a moment. We've been here forever.
So I had to learn how to manage those people. And I developed some skills there that I still use to this day. When you have a meeting and there's things on it, a lot of organizations and boards have consent agendas. There's items on the agenda. There's a big agenda. Then they have some items they call consent agendas, which is consent items, which basically is saying we don't need to actually have a motion. We're just going to agree on all these 6 things. We'll have a quick motion and then we move on to the other stuff. Well, they would put things in that category and I go, I think that agreed on right. And I thought it merited.
I saw that.
Well, I did see it, but I wanted. I thought it merited further discussion, deeper discussion. Yes. And so I would do is I'd make an appointment to see somebody for 10 minutes with a cup of coffee. I say, hey, here's this item in the consent agenda. I think it needs to be moved to this because we need to discuss X, Y, and Z.
Right.
Or I'd go see the person who was running the meeting and say, I really want you to know I have some concerns about this. Because the last thing you want to do in a place like the Pentagon is get into a meeting or any organization, corporation, for example, and say, I disagree with that. Well, if you don't have any allies in the room with you, it's going nowhere.
So you got to be strategic to even disagree.
Yeah, exactly. So then when you say, I have some concerns about that, those 2 or 3 people will say, me too, because you've already prepped them. So people go and say, I couldn't get so-and-so done because you were a lone ranger.
Yeah.
And you haven't put much thought into it.
People do that on a smaller level too. Sometimes when you're on boards, you'll have someone I've had people to call me and say, hey, this is coming up on is this that I need you to say, I moved to. But I like to, I look at that and I say, I'm a little girl from East St. Louis, Illinois. Right.
And I'm in this place. Right. And who'd have thought?
Because I'm sitting
I
here like,
know.
what?
I know, and this is just.
Did you ever experience like any doubt, any imposter syndrome coming from? Because sometimes I'm gonna be honest with you, me being from East St. Louis and some of the spaces I've been in, and God has blessed me. I'm like, I never would have thought I could be sitting at dinner with these people.
Absolutely. I mean, like in my civilian and in my military career, I'd be sitting in some place and go, how am I even here? And are they going to find out that I probably shouldn't be here?
Wow.
But then I would tell myself, but you know what? I'd say, no, you worked really hard. You have to be your own cheerleader. That's what I say to you. You have to be your own personal cheerleader. If you don't have other cheerleaders in your life, you have to be the one to say, no, do the inventory. I did this. I did that. I worked hard for this.
Right.
I have this degree. I've opened this business. That's when some of those doubts creep in. That's what you have to do. You be your own cheerleader. And that's what I would do. I would just say, no.
You have to. That self-talk is real. You gotta, I love it. I love it. So outside of these two amazing careers, you also said, I'm like, you sit on the board of the Green Bay Packers. Like, where does the football come in? Like, what is
Yeah, well, I know, and I know there's probably some Green Bay Packer haters. We'll go past that. Well, I mean, but then I had retired from the Army, and I was back in Madison, and I was in the community, and everyone knew me in the community. And the Packers board is rather large; it's over 40 people, but they make an effort to have people from Milwaukee, southern part of the state, and of course Brown County and Green Bay, where the team is headquartered. And so they were searching for someone from the southern part of the state, and I was. Someone gave them my name. I went, and it's a volunteer board. I'm not getting paid for this board. And they went through a number of interviews with them, and what really we talked about at one point was, the military had a lot of people at that time who were in Iraq and Afghanistan who were suffering from concussions, traumatic brain injuries. And there was a synergy there that, one of the senior generals in the Army linked up with people in the NFL. And they were looking at equipment, helmets in the military, helmets in football, concussion protocols. What do you ask and what are you looking for when you want to pull somebody out of the fight? Because they want to go back in. I'm good, coach, even though I see two of you. I'm good. I'll be back in. So we talked about that because I was very familiar with what we were doing and trying to do with improve the equipment to make people safer. So that we talked about that. We didn't talk about football. We did talk about the Packers and their tradition, but they didn't want me on the board because I knew football. It was because I could add value to their audit committee, or they have an investment committee. It's just like any other corporation. And so then after, I joined that board, and then I've been on the executive committee, which is a smaller group of people who work with our president, Mark Murphy. There's 7 of us who help them with capital expenditures. We had a stock sale a couple of years ago. So that's approved through that body, is the executive committee. So, and then we get updates on football operations, of course, from the general manager. Coach doesn't talk to us, but because that's football. But we're the administrative and the actual operation of the business, because we know football is
all
a
of it is
business.
A business. Yes.
Is what I'm involved in.
I'm just thinking back to the beginning of your story, standing in that gym that day, and it was like, what is this? Oh, it gives a stipend. And it took you on this amazing journey all the way to the Pentagon, as well as the Green Bay Packers office. If someone is sitting here and they're saying, hey, I'm thinking about the military, because sometimes we only get like a very small scope. What advice would you give them? 2 to 3 tips on taking this path in this journey?
I would say, 1, it's important for us to be in that space. We talked about diversity earlier, because a lot of insignificant decisions are made in the military. But the other piece of that is a lot of people in the military end up in Congress. They end up being secretaries in cabinets for presidents, and they're making big decisions. And I wrote a speech once, and my husband gets credit for the title. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So you have to get into the military. You have to do what you need to do to work your way up. So you're in position. You're in those rooms. You can be the authentic person who says, I think we need to take this off that agenda, or we think we need to think about this differently. Because if we cede that ground, they're going to make those decisions for us and about us. That's the other piece of that. So that's my advice. When, people are going to say, oh, it's too hard. Well, some of us have to make it to the top.
Yes.
Because, again, we need to be in those rooms making those decisions.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Marcia Anderson, you are truly a Black boss lady.
And your legacy will forever live on the Black Boss Ladies platform.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for joining us on the BBL Platform Podcast, the place where legacies live. We hope you will join us on our next inspirational journey to success. Be sure to rate, like, and subscribe to our show. For more information, please visit our website at theBBLplatform.com.